Hello, folks. Hello, folks at home. My name is, as always, Rogan Audica. I am here to read a few more chapters of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I did not turn the monetization off for the live reading tonight. If anybody feels inclined to complain, do so, because that would be the reason I would reverse that. Thanks for being here. I wish I was more in the mood for fun, but I'll do what I can anyway. How's that? I'm gonna do what I can. War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I hope you were here last night and caught my reading of the first, I think, 8 chapters. Yeah, I'm on chapter the 9th. If you didn't, of course, that stream is saved and re-uploaded, so you can hear my reading of the whole novel. I think it's probably going to take 4 or 5 nights. I'm not sure. I might go short tonight. Trying not to go short on any of these. Nice to see you. The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, picking up where we left off, chapter the 9th, The Fighting Begins. Let's see if I can do this a little better. Saturday lives in my memory as a day of suspense. It was a day of lassitude, too, hot and close, with, I am told, a rapidly fluctuating barometer. I had slept but little, though my wife had succeeded in sleeping, and I rose early. I went into my garden before breakfast and stood listening, but towards the common there was nothing stirring but a lark. The milkman came as usual. I heard the rattle of his chariot, and I went round to the side gate to ask the latest news. He told me that during the night the Martians had been surrounded by troops and that guns were expected. Then, a familiar reassuring note, I heard a train running towards Woking. They aren't to be killed, said the milkman, if that can possibly be avoided. I saw my neighbor gardening, chatted with him for a time, and then strolled in to breakfast. It was a most unexceptional morning. My neighbor is of opinion that the troops would be able to capture or to destroy the Martians during the day. It's a pity they make themselves so unapproachable, he said. It would be curious to know how they live on another planet. We might learn a thing or two. He came up to the fence and extended a handful of strawberries, for his gardening was as generous as it was enthusiastic. At the same time, he told me of the burning of the pine woods about the Byfleet golf links. They say, said he, that there's another of those blessed things fallen there, number 2. But one's enough, surely. This lot'll cost the insurance people a pretty penny before everything's settled. He laughed with an air of the greatest good humor as he said this. The woods, he said, were still burning, and pointed out a haze of smoke to me. They will be hot underfoot for days on account of the thick soil of pine needles and turf, he said, and then grew serious over poor Ogilvy. After breakfast, instead of working, I decided to walk down towards the common. Under the railway bridge I found a group of soldiers, sappers, I think, men in small round caps, dirty red jackets unbuttoned, and showing their blue shirts, dark trousers, and boots coming to the calf. They told me no one was allowed over the canal, and, looking along the road towards the bridge, I saw one of the Cardigan men standing sentinel there. I talked with these soldiers for a time. I told them of my sight of the Martians on the previous evening. None of them had seen the Martians, and they had but the vaguest idea of them, so that they plied me with questions. They said that they did not know who had authorized the movements of the troops. Their idea was that a dispute had arisen at the Horse Guards. The ordinary sapper is a great deal better educated than the common soldier, and they discussed the peculiar conditions of the possible fight with some acuteness. I described the heat ray to them, and they began to argue among themselves. Crawl up under cover and rush 'em, say I, said one. Get out, said another. What's cover against this here heat? Sticks to cook yer. What we got to do is go as near the ground as let us. What we got to do is go as near as the ground will let us, and then drive a trench. Blow your trenches. You always want trenches. You ought to have been born a rabbit, Snippy. Ain't they got any necks, then? Said a third, abruptly, a little contemplative dark man smoking a pipe. I repeated my description. Octopuses, said he. That's what I calls 'em. Talk about fishers of men. Fighters of fish it is this time. It ain't no murder killing beasts like that, said the first speaker. Why not shell the darn thing straight off and finish 'em, said the little dark man. You can't tell what they might do. "Where's your shells?" said the first speaker. "There ain't no time. Do it in a rush. That's my tip, and do it at once." So they discussed it. After a while, I left them and went on to the railway station to get as many morning papers as I could. But I will not weary the reader with a description of that long morning and of the longer afternoon. I did not succeed in getting a glimpse of the common, for even Horsell and Chobham church towers were in the hands of the military authorities. The soldiers I addressed didn't know anything. The officers were mysterious as well as busy. I found people in the town quite secure again in the presence of the military, and I heard for the first time from Marshall, the tobacconist, that his son was among the dead on the common. My name's Marshall. The soldiers had made the people on the outskirts of Horsell lock up and leave their houses. I got back to lunch about 2, very tired, for, as I have said, the day was extremely hot and dull, and in order to refresh myself, I took a cold bath in the afternoon. About 4:30, I went up to the railway station to get an evening paper, for the morning papers had contained only a very inaccurate description of the killing of Stent, Henderson, Ogilvy, and the others, but there was little I didn't know. The Martians did not show an inch of themselves. They seemed busy in their pit, and there was a sound of hammering and an almost continuous streamer of smoke. Apparently they were busy getting ready for a struggle. Fresh attempts have been made to signal, but without success, was the stereotyped formula of the papers. A sapper told me it was done by a man in a ditch with a flag on a long pole. The Martians took as much notice of such advances as we should of the lowing of a cow. I must confess the sight of all this armament, all this preparation, greatly excited me. Well, hello, Zoe. I got a cat. She's purring. She wants to get in my lap. Yeah, you happy I moved it back over here where you can get in my lap, buddy? I love you, Zoe. You can't see her, but she's in my lap and she's purring. I love you too, Zoe. I haven't sat in the chair while I did this for a long time. That's one of the reasons Zoe is always bugging me while I do the stream. She wants to sit in my lap while I read. Yes, I love you too, pal. Yes, you're a good kitty. Not good content, though, because you can't see her except for the tip of her tail. Yes, I love you, Zoe. I must confess the sight of all this armament, all this preparation, greatly excited me. My imagination became belligerent and defeated the invaders in a dozen striking ways. Something of my schoolboy dreams of battle and heroism came back. It hardly seemed a fair fight to me at that time. They seemed very helpless in that pit of theirs. About 3 o'clock, there began the thud of a gun at measured intervals from Chertsey or Addlestone. I learned that the smoldering pine wood into which the second cylinder had fallen was being shelled, in the hope of destroying that object before it opened. It was only about 5, however, that a field gun reached Chobham for use against the first body of Martians. About 6 in the evening, as I sat at tea with my wife in the summer house talking vigorously about the battle that was lowering upon us, I heard a muffled detonation from the common, and immediately after a gust of firing. Close on the heels of that came a violent rattling crash quite close to us that shook the ground, and, starting out upon the lawn, I saw the tops of the trees about the Oriental College burst into smoky red flame, and the tower of the little church beside it slide down into ruin. The pinnacle of the mosque had vanished, and the roofline of the college itself looked as if a 100-ton gun had been at work upon it. One of our chimneys cracked as if a shot had hit it, flew, and a piece of it came clattering down the tiles and made a heap of broken red fragments upon the flower bed by my study window. I can't believe these characters are supposed to be naive enough not to leave before this happens. I and my wife stood amazed. Then I realized that the crest of Maybury Hill must be within range of the Martians' heat ray now that the college was cleared out of the way. At that, I gripped my wife's arm and without ceremony ran her out into the road. Then I fetched out the servant, telling her I would go upstairs myself for the box she was clamoring for. We can't possibly stay here, I said, and as I spoke, the firing reopened for a moment upon the common. But where are we to go? My wife said in terror. I thought, perplexed. Then I remembered... Yes, Zoe? Then I remembered her cousins at Leatherhead. "Leatherhead!" I shouted above the sudden noise. She looked away from me downhill. The people were coming out of their houses, astonished. "How are we to get to Leatherhead?" she said. Down the hill I saw a bevy of hussars ride under the railway bridge. 3 galloped through the open gates of the Oriental College. 2 others dismounted and began running from house to house. The sun, shining through the smoke that drove up from the tops of the trees, seemed blood red and threw an unfamiliar lurid light upon everything. What is this, Zoe? Why are you hoarse? "Stop here," said I. "You are safe here." And I started off at once for the Spotted Dog, for I knew the landlord had a horse and dog cart. I ran, for I perceived that in a moment everyone upon this side of the hill would be moving. I found him in his bar, quite unaware of what was going on behind his house. A man stood with his back to me, talking to him. "I must have £1," said the landlord, "and I've no one to drive it." "I'll give you 2, said I over the stranger's shoulder. "What for?" "And I'll bring it back by midnight," I said. "Lord," said the landlord, "what's the hurry? I'm selling my bit of a pig. £2 and you bring it back? What's going on now?" I explained hastily that I had to leave my home and so secured the dog cart. At the time, it did not seem to me nearly so urgent that the landlord should leave his. I took care to have the cart there and then, drove it off down the road and leave... Zoe, shh. Be quiet. What are you doing? Be quiet. Is this really happening? This is an emergency? Yes. Yes, the Earth is being invaded by Martian octopus monsters with heat rays, starting in Woking, wherever that is. We are in trouble, man. Quick, pack your shit. Everything that you really want to keep. Right away, they're coming for us. I don't know why Zoe is suddenly, she's not acting like she's in heat other than suddenly being really hoarse and yakking and yakking and yakking at me. Zoe, you gotta stop, buddy. I don't know why you're doing this. Do you need more treats? I just have had so much of a day that is so annoying that the cat, like, disrupting the stream slightly by making cute noises is somehow really close to being the last straw. Here you go. Maybe she did eat the treats. All right. Yes. I mean, you know. All right. It isn't so bad. There are not evil Martian octopus monsters invading in my neighborhood right now, like in this book. So I should be of good cheer. The beech trees below the house were burning while I did this. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I took care to have the cart there and then, drove it off down the road, and, leaving it in charge of my wife and servant, rushed into my house and packed a few valuables, such plate as we had, and so forth. The beech trees below the house were burning while I did this, and the palings up the road glowed red. While I was occupied in this way, one of the dismounted hussars came running up. He was going from house to house, warning people to leave. He was going on as I came out of my front door, lugging my treasures done up in a tablecloth. I shouted after him, "What news?" He turned, stared, bawled something about crawling out in a thing like a dish cover, and ran on to the gate of the house at the crest. A sudden whirl of black smoke driving across the road hid him for a moment. I ran to my neighbor's door and rapped to satisfy myself of what I already knew, that his wife had gone to London with him and had locked up their house. I went in again, according to my promise, to get my servant's box, lugged it out, clapped it beside her on the tail of the dog cart, and then caught the reins and jumped up into the driver's seat beside my wife. In another moment, we were clear of the smoke and noise, and spanking down the opposite slope of Maybury Hill toward Old Woking. Blaze, how are you? In front was a quiet, sunny landscape, a wheat field ahead on either side of the road, and the Maybury Inn with its swinging sign. I saw the doctor's cart ahead of me. At the bottom of the hill, I turned my head to look at the hillside I was leaving. Thick streamers of black smoke shot with threads of red fire were driving up into the still air and throwing dark shadows upon the green treetops eastward. The smoke already extended far away to the east and west, to the Byfleet pine woods eastward, and to Woking on the west. The road was dotted with people running towards us, and very faint now, but very distinct through the hot, quiet air, one heard the whir of a machine gun that was presently stilled, and an intermittent cracking of rifles. Apparently the Martians were setting fire to everything within range of their heat ray. I'm not an expert driver, and I had immediately to turn my attention to the horse. When I looked back again, the second hill had hidden the black smoke. I slashed the horse with the whip and gave him a loose rein until Woking and Send lay between us and that quivering tumult. I overtook and passed the doctor between Woking and Send. Chapter the 10th. In the Storm. Thanks for being here, guys. Leatherhead is about 12 miles from Maybury Hill. The scent of hay was in the air through the lush meadows beyond Purford, and the hedges on either side were sweet and gay with multitudes of dog roses. The heavy firing that had broken out while we were driving down Maybury Hill ceased as abruptly as it began, leaving the evening very peaceful and still. We got to Leatherhead without misadventure about 9 o'clock, and the horse had an hour's rest while I took supper with my cousins and commended my wife to their care. My wife was curiously silent throughout the drive and seemed oppressed with forebodings of evil. I talked to her reassuringly, pointing out that the Martians were tied to the pit by sheer heaviness and at the utmost could but crawl a little out of it, but she answered only in monosyllables. Had it not been for my promise to the innkeeper, she would, I think, have urged me to stay in Leatherhead that night. Would that I had. Her face, I remember, was very white as we parted. Oh my God. So, the day before, the wife was the one who all day kept saying, they're going to come here. They're going to hit the house. They're going to hit the neighborhood. And the next day, it turns out she's right about that. And he's going to take the rented dog cart back. Like, yeah, that's one of those things where if you've borrowed a car to get out of the war zone, just stay clear. Don't worry about what you promised to do with the car. For my own part, I had been feverishly excited all day. Something very like the war fever that occasionally runs through a civilized community had got into my blood, and in my heart I was not so very sorry that I had to return to Maybury that night. I was even afraid that last fusillade I had heard might mean the extermination of our invaders from Mars. I can best express my state of mind by saying that I wanted to be in at the death. It was nearly 11 when I started to return. The night was unexpectedly dark. To me, walking out of the lighted passage of my cousin's house, it seemed indeed black, and it was as hot and close as the day. Overhead the clouds were driving fast, albeit not a breath stirred the shrubs about us. My cousin's man lit both lamps. Happily, I knew the road intimately. My wife stood in the light of the doorway and watched me until I jumped up into the dog cart. Then abruptly she turned and went in, leaving my cousins side by side, wishing me good hap. I was a little depressed at first with the contagion of my wife's fears, but very soon my thoughts reverted to the Martians. At that time I was absolutely in the dark as to the course of the evening's fighting. I did not know even the circumstances that had precipitated the conflict. As I came through Occam, for that was the way I returned, and not through Send and Old Woking, I saw along the western horizon a blood-red glow, which, as I drew nearer, crept slowly up the sky. The driving clouds of the gathering thunderstorm mingled there with masses of black and red smoke. So, somebody in the stream earlier, actually not the reading stream, but in my other stream earlier, said they'd had trouble getting into this book because of all the place names. But the point of Wells doing that is that it's a well-known area. So you could actually get out a road map and look at the neighborhood where this is happening. Now, of course, but this was written 1898, so that's 128 years ago. But he figured most of his readers in England would have, I mean, this, for all I know, was published in a magazine originally out of London, and so these areas are particularly well known. Published by William Heinemann, London, 1898. So it's probably a book originally. In any case, he knew that you could look at a map, a road map, and figure out where this is going on. You know how fantasy novels often, since Tolkien, have maps of the territories they take place on. This is, you've already got the map in your house. And so that's why he's doing that. It's creepy, actually. Ripley Street was deserted, and except for a lighted window or so, the village showed not a sign of life. But I narrowly escaped an accident at the corner of the road to Pierford, where a knot of people stood with their backs to me. They said nothing to me as I passed. I do not know what they knew of the things happening beyond the hill, nor do I know if the silent houses I passed on my way were sleeping securely, or deserted and empty, or harassed and watching against the terror of the night. From Ripley until I came through Pierford, I was in the valley of the Wey, and the red glare was hidden from me. As I ascended the little hill beyond Pierford Church, the glare came into view again, and the trees about me shivered with the first intimation of the storm that was upon me. Then I heard midnight pealing out from Pierford Church behind me, and then came the silhouette of Maybury Hill, with its treetops and roofs black and sharp against the red. Even as I beheld this, a lurid green glare lit the road about me and showed the distant woods toward Addlestone. I felt a tug at the reins. I saw that the driving clouds had been pierced, as it were, by a thread of green fire, suddenly lighting their confusion and falling into the field to my left. It was the third falling star. Close on its apparition, and blindingly violet by contrast, danced out the first lightning of the gathering storm, and the thunder burst like a rocket overhead. The horse took the bit between his teeth and bolted. A moderate incline runs towards the foot of Maybury Hill, and down this we clattered. Once the lightning had begun, it went on in as rapid a succession of flashes as I have ever seen. The thunderclaps, treading one on the heels of another and with a strange crackling accompaniment, sounded more like the workings of a gigantic electric machine than the usual detonating reverberations. The flickering light was blinding and confusing, and a thin hail smote gustily at my face as I drove down the slope. At first I regarded little but the road before me, and then abruptly my attention was arrested by something that was moving rapidly down the opposite slope of Maybury Hill. At first I took it for the wet roof of a house, but one flash following another showed it to be in swift rolling movement. It was an elusive vision, a moment of bewildering darkness, and then, in a flash-like daylight, the red masses of the orphanage near the crest of the hill, the green tops of the pine trees, and this problematical object came out clear and sharp and bright. And this thing I saw, how can I describe it? A monstrous tripod, higher than many houses, striding over the young pine trees and smashing them aside in its career. A walking engine of glittering metal striding now across the heather, articulate ropes of steel dangling from it, and the clattering tumult of its passage mingling with the riot of the thunder. A flash, and it came out vividly, heeling over one way with 2 feet in the air, to vanish and reappear almost instantly, as it seemed, with the next flash 100 yards nearer. Can you imagine a milking stool tilted and bowled violently along the ground? Can you imagine a milking stool tilted and bowled violently along the ground? That was the impression those instant flashes gave. But instead of a milking stool, imagine it a great body of machinery on a tripod stand. So I think every illustration and movie version I've seen, the tripods have like articulated legs with joints like an insect. I don't think I've ever noticed before that he describes it as like rolling, like it's doing this weird looping thing and the legs are staying straight. Then suddenly the trees in the pine wood ahead of me were parted, as brittle reeds are parted by a man thrusting through them. They were snapped off and driven headlong, and a second huge tripod appeared, rushing as it seemed headlong towards me, and I was galloping hard to meet it. At the sight of the second monster, my nerve went altogether. Not stopping to look again, I wrenched the horse's head hard round to the right, and in another moment the dog-cart had heeled over upon the horse. The shaft smashed noisily, and I was flung sideways and fell heavily into a shallow pool of water. He said he wasn't a good driver. Pardon me. I have drunk all my water. I'll have to take a break in a minute to get more, but I crawled out almost immediately and crouched, my feet still in the water under a clump of firs. The horse lay motionless, his neck was broken, poor brute, and by the lightning flashes I saw the black bulk of the overturned dogcart and the silhouette of the wheel still spinning slowly. In another moment, the colossal mechanism went striding by me and passed uphill towards Pureford. Seen nearer, the thing was incredibly strange, for it was no mere insensate machine driving on its way. Machine it was, with a ringing metallic pace and long, flexible, glittering tentacles, one of which gripped a young pine tree, swinging and rattling about its strange body. It picked its road as it went striding along, and the brazen hood that surmounted it moved to and fro with the inevitable suggestion of a head looking about. You've got to learn not to do that, buddy. Zoe tried to jump onto the keyboard. I really don't know what it is with her and the keyboard. It picked its road as it went striding along, and the brazen hood that surmounted it moved to and fro with the inevitable suggestion of a head looking about. Behind the main body was a huge mass of white metal like a gigantic fisherman's basket, and puffs of green smoke squirted out from the joints of the limbs as the monster swept by me, and in an instant it was gone. I gotta say, that description is so much more frightening than any of the ones in the movie versions. It's really... H.G. Wells had a way with words. So much I saw then, all vaguely for the flickering of the lightning in blinding high lights and dense black shadows. As it passed, it set up an exultant, deafening howl that drowned the thunder. Alloo, alloo. And in another minute it was with its companion, half a mile away, stooping over something in the field. I have no doubt this thing in the field was the third of the 10 cylinders they had fired at us from Mars. For some minutes I lay there in the rain and darkness, watching by the intermittent light these monstrous beings of metal moving about in the distance over the hedge tops. A thin hail was now beginning, and as it came and went their figures grew misty and then flashed into clearness again. Now and then came a gap in the lightning, and the night swallowed them up. I was soaked with hail above and puddle water below. It was some time before my blank astonishment would let me struggle up the bank to a drier position or think at all of my imminent peril. Not far from me was a little one-roomed squatter's hut of wood, surrounded by a patch of potato garden. I struggled to my feet at last, and, crouching and making use of every chance of cover, I made a run for this. I hammered at the door, but I could not make the people hear if there were any people inside, and after a time I desisted and, availing myself of a ditch for the greater part of the way, succeeded in crawling, unobserved by these monstrous machines, into the pine wood towards Maybury. Under cover of this I pushed on, wet and shivering now, towards my own house. I walked among the trees, trying to find the footpath. It was very dark indeed in the wood, for the lightning was now becoming infrequent, and the hail, which was pouring down in a torrent, fell in columns through the gaps in the heavy foliage. If I had fully realized the meaning of all the things I had seen, I should have immediately worked my way round through Byfleet to Street Cobham, and so gone back to rejoin my wife at Leatherhead. But that night the strangeness of things about me and my physical wretchedness prevented me, for I was bruised, weary, wet to the skin, deafened and blinded by the storm. I had a vague idea of going on to my own house, and that was as much motive as I had. I staggered through the trees, fell into a ditch and bruised my knees against a plank, and finally splashed out into the lane that ran down from the College Arms. I say splashed, for the storm water was sweeping the sand down the hill in a muddy torrent. There in the darkness a man blundered into me and sent me reeling back. He gave a cry of terror, sprang sideways, and rushed on before I could gather my wits sufficiently to speak to him. So heavy was the stress of the storm just at this place that I had the hardest task to win my way up the hill. I went close up to the fence on the left and worked my way along its palings. Near the top I stumbled upon something soft and, by a flash of lightning, saw between my feet a heap of black broadcloth and a pair of boots. Before I could distinguish clearly how the man lay, the flicker of light had passed. I stood over him waiting for the next flash. When it came, I saw that he was a sturdy man, cheaply but not shabbily dressed. His head was bent under his body, and he lay crumpled up close to the fence as though he had been flung violently against it. Overcoming the repugnance natural to one who had never before touched a dead body, I stopped and turned him over to feel for his heart. He was quite dead. Apparently his neck had been broken. The lightning flashed for a third time, and his face leaped upon me. I sprang to my feet. It was the landlord of the Spotted Dog, whose conveyance I had taken. I stepped over him gingerly and pushed on up the hill. I made my way by the police station and the College Arms towards my own house. Nothing was burning on the hillside, though from the common there still came a red glare and a rolling tumult of ruddy smoke beating up against the drenching hail. So far as I could see by the flashes, the houses about me were mostly uninjured. By the College Arms a dark heap lay in the road. Down the road towards Maybury Bridge there were voices and the sound of feet, but I had not the courage to shout or to go to them. I let myself in with my latchkey, closed, locked, and bolted the door, staggered to the foot of the staircase, and sat down. My imagination was full of those striding metallic monsters and of the dead body smashed against the fence. I crouched at the foot of the staircase with my back to the wall, shivering violently. That's the end of chapter 10. I'm going to read a couple more chapters. I got to get more water, guys. Sorry, I'm not prepared for this. Being exciting enough to make my mouth dry. I'll be right back, of course. I have read this novel at least 4 times over the years. I first read War of the Worlds when I was, I think, 7 years old. Somebody gave me as a gift one of those cheap public domain hardbacks you get off the tables at the front of chain bookstores like Barnes and Nobles. Would have been a Walden Books back then. But it was a collection of, I think, 5 of Wells's first 6 novels, the first 5 science fiction adventure toned novels, and a collection of short stories. I liked this even when I was 8 or 7 or however old that was. But Wells is not just an extraordinarily exciting and striking pulp writer, and one of the most imaginative and eye-wideningly accurate imaginers of future events. In extrapolative terms, he's also a satirist in such a way that reading and rereading these classic Wells novels always reveals more. There's always hidden depths. There's always more layers. Thanks for being here, guys. Chapter the 11th, At the Window. I have already said that my storms of emotion have a trick of exhausting themselves. After a time, I discovered that I was cold and wet and with little pools of water about me on the stair carpet. I got up almost mechanically, went into the dining room and drank some whiskey, and then I was moved to change my clothes. After I had done that, I went upstairs to my study, but why I did so I do not know. The window of my study looks over the trees and the railway towards Horsell Common. In the hurry of our departure, this window had been left open. The passage was dark, and, by contrast with the picture the window frame enclosed, the side of the room seemed impenetrably dark. I stopped short in the doorway. The thunderstorm had passed. The towers of the Oriental College and the pine trees about it had gone, and very far away, lit by a vivid red glare, the common about the sandpits was visible. Across the light, huge black shapes, grotesque and strange, moved busily to and fro. It seemed indeed as if the whole country in that direction was on fire, a broad hillside set with minute tongues of flame, swaying and writhing with the gusts of the dying storm, and throwing a red reflection upon the cloud scud above. Every now and then a haze of smoke from some nearer conflagration drove across the window and hid the Martian shapes. I could not see what they were doing, nor the clear form of them, nor recognize the black objects they were busied upon. Neither could I see the nearer fire, though the reflections of it danced on the wall and ceiling of the study. A sharp, resinous tang of burning was in the air. I closed the door noiselessly and crept towards the window. As I did so, the view opened out until, on the one hand, it reached to the houses about Woking Station, and on the other to the charred and blackened pine woods of Byfleet. There was a light down below the hill on the railway, near the arch, and several of the houses along the Maybury Road and the streets near the station were glowing ruins. The light upon the railway puzzled me at first. There were a black heap and a vivid glare, and to the right of that a row of yellow oblongs. Then I perceived this was a wrecked train, the forepart smashed and on fire, the hinder carriages still upon the rails. Between these three main centers of light, the houses, the train, and the burning country towards Chobham, stretched irregular patches of dark country, broken here and there by intervals of dimly glowing and smoking ground. It was the strangest spectacle, that black expanse set with fire. It reminded me, more than anything else, of the potteries at night. At first I could distinguish no people at all, though I peered intently for them. Later I saw against the light of Woking Station a number of black figures hurrying one after the other across the line. And this was the little world in which I had been living securely for years, this fiery chaos. Buddy, do not do it, Zoe. No, you cannot walk on the computer. What's wrong with you? Stay there, buddy. In fact, you gotta get down. You can't stay there either. Why are you doing that, kitty? I think Zoe, the cat, she wants to curl up right here on the keyboard while I read because of the way I'm leaning in. And this was the little world in which I had been living securely for years, this fiery chaos. What had happened in the last 7 hours I still did not know, nor did I know, though I was beginning to guess, the relation between these mechanical colossi and the sluggish lumps I had seen disgorged from the cylinder. With a queer feeling of impersonal interest, I turned my desk chair to the window, sat down, and stared at the blackened country, and particularly at the three gigantic black things that were going to and fro in the glare about the sand pits. They seemed amazingly busy. I began to ask myself what they could be. Were they intelligent mechanisms? Such a thing I felt was impossible. Or did a Martian sit within each, ruling, directing, using, much as a man's brain sits and rules in his body? So remember, this was written in 1898. Somebody could look this up. I believe the automobile had been invented, but they would have been rare. And so the idea of a vehicle, of a mechanical or electric vehicle without an animal pulling it like a horse, was very much a new thing. I really don't know why Zoe's bugging, but if you've been here before, you'll know she does that. Hi, Bloodhawk. Yeah, she does this regularly. She's acting a little bit like she's in heat. I mean, it's kind of nice out, and there are cats outside in the yard. But on the other hand, she knows I've got the treats over here, and she likes to hang out in my lap while I read. So yeah, you can't really see, but there's no room for her to hang out anywhere. Like, I mean, you kind of can, but I really am leaning in close because it does. You hear the echo off the book, actually, and I'm doing that on purpose. My eyes are really weak and my glasses are bad too. So, at some point in the future, I'll do this with something gothic as hell, and I'll do it with candles. I'll have a candelabra, and I'll read like Vathek or Melmoth or something, and it'll be rad. Thanks for being here, guys. This is really fun. I began to compare the things to human machines, to ask myself for the first time in my life how an ironclad or a steam engine would seem to an intelligent lower animal. The storm had left the sky clear, and over the smoke of the burning land the little fading pinpoint of Mars was dropping into the west when a soldier came into my garden. I heard a light a slight scraping at the fence, and rousing myself from the lethargy that had fallen upon me, I looked down and saw him dimly clambering over the palings. At the sight of another human being, my torpor passed, and I leaned out of the window eagerly. "Hist," said I, in a whisper. He stopped astride of the fence in doubt. Then he came over and across the lawn to the corner of the house. He bent down and stopped softly. "Who's there?" he said, also whispering, standing under the window and peering up. "Where are you going?" I asked. "God knows." "Are you trying to hide?" "That's it. Come into the house," I said. I went down, unfastened the door, and let him in and locked the door again. I could not see his face. He was hatless, and his coat was unbuttoned. Oh my God, my nose is freaking out. Hold on. It really is the main problem with doing these long readings live, is that I have to like snorf with the snot and the itchy nose, and I got bad allergies. It's dusty in here. I got cats. Hi, Nick Cares. How are you? "My God," he said as I drew him in. "What has happened?" I asked. "What hasn't?" In the obscurity, I could see he made a gesture of despair. "They wiped us out, simply wiped us out," he repeated again and again. He followed me, almost mechanically, into the dining room. "Take some whiskey," I said, pouring out a stiff dose. He drank it. Then, abruptly, he sat down before the table, put his head on his arms, and began to sob and weep like a little boy in a perfect passion of emotion, while I, with a curious forgetfulness of my own recent despair, stood beside him, wondering. I don't know what Wells's personal background was. For one, his close understanding of tactically what goes on a battleground, on an urban battleground, like with guerrilla warfare. Two, the trauma from moment to moment in a combat arena or a disaster situation. I've seen that exact thing. Like, I haven't seen it with taking a drink, but I've seen somebody do the thing where you're like, "Here, man, here's a joint, have a hit," and somebody takes a hit off the joint, and then they go to pieces and start weeping, just a grown man just weeping, and you're standing there like, just smoke as much of that as you need to smoke, man. It's the exact same moment. But he, over and over, Wells makes it clear that he really understands how that works, what that is, throughout this book. "Take some whiskey," I said, pouring out a stiff dose. He drank it. Then abruptly he sat down before the table, put his head on his arms, and began to sob and weep like a little boy in a perfect passion of emotion, while I, with a curious forgetfulness of my own recent despair, stood beside him, wondering. It was a long time before he could steady his nerves to answer my questions, and then he answered perplexingly and brokenly. He was a driver in the artillery and had only come into action about 7. At that time, firing was going on across the common, and it was said the first party of Martians were crawling slowly toward their second cylinder under cover of a metal shield. Later, this shield staggered up on tripod legs and became the first of the fighting machines I had seen. The gun he drove had been unlimbered near Horzel in order to command the sand pits, and its arrival it was that had precipitated the action. As the limber gunners went to the rear, his horse trod in a rabbit hole and came down, throwing him into a depression of the ground. At the same moment the gun exploded behind him, the ammunition blew up, there was fire all about him, and he found himself lying under a heap of charred dead men and dead horses. "I lay still," he said, "scared out of my wits with the forequarter of a horse atop of me. We'd been wiped out, and the smell, good God, like burnt meat. I was hurt across the back by the fall of the horse, and there I had to lie until I felt better. Just like parade it had been a minute before, then stumble, bang, swish. Wiped out," he said. He had hid under the dead horse for a long time, peeping out furtively across the common. The Cardigan men had tried a rush in skirmishing order at the pit, simply to be swept out of existence. Then the monster had risen to its feet and had begun to walk leisurely to and fro across the common among the few fugitives, with its head-like hood turning about exactly like the head of a cowled human being. A kind of arm carried a complicated metallic case about which green flashes scintillated, and out of the funnel of this there smote the heat ray. In a few minutes there was, so far as the soldier could see, not a living thing left upon the common, and every bush and tree upon it that was not already a blackened skeleton was burning. The hussars had been on the road beyond the curvature of the ground, and he saw nothing of them. He heard the Maxims rattle for a time and then become still. The giant saved Woking station in its cluster of houses until the last. Then in a moment the heat ray was brought to bear, and the town became a heap of fiery ruins. Then the thing shut off the heat ray and, turning its back upon the artilleryman, began to waddle away toward the smoldering pine woods that sheltered the second cylinder. As it did so, a second glittering titan built itself up out of the pit. The second monster followed the first, and at that the artillerymen began to crawl very cautiously across the hot heather ash toward Horsell. He managed to get alive into the ditch by the side of the road and so escaped to Woking. There his story became ejaculatory. The place was impassable. It seems there were a few people alive there, frantic for the most part, and many burned and scalded. He was turned aside by the fire and hid among some almost scorching heaps of broken wall as one of the Martian giants returned. He saw this one pursue a man, catch him up in one of its steely tentacles, and knock his head against the trunk of a pine tree. At last, after nightfall, the artilleryman made a rush for it and got over the railway embankment. That's intense, man. Since then, he had been skulking along toward Maybury in the hope of getting out of danger Londonward. People were hiding in trenches and cellars, and many of the survivors had made off towards Woking village and Send. He had been consumed with thirst until he found one of the water mains near the railway arch smashed, and the water bubbling out like a spring upon the road. That was the story I got from him, bit by bit. He grew calmer, telling me and trying to make me see the things he had seen. He had eaten no food since midday, he told me early in his narrative, and I found some mutton and bread in the pantry and brought it into the room. We lit no lamp for fear of attracting the Martians, and ever and again our hands would touch upon bread or meat. As he talked, things about us came darkly out of the darkness, and the trampled bushes and broken rose trees outside the window grew distinct. It would seem that a number of men or animals had rushed across the lawn. I began to see his face, blackened and haggard, as no doubt mine was also. When we had finished eating, we went softly upstairs to my study, and I looked again out of the open window. In one night, the valley had become a valley of ashes. The fires had dwindled now. Where flames had been, there were now streamers of smoke, but the countless ruins of shattered and gutted houses and blasted and blackened trees that the night had hidden stood out now gaunt and terrible in the pitiless light of dawn. Yet here and there some object had had the luck to escape. A white railway signal here, the end of a greenhouse there, white and fresh amid the wreckage. Never before in the history of warfare had destruction been so indiscriminate and so universal. And shining with the growing light of the east, 3 of the metallic giants stood about the pit, their cowls rotating as though they were surveying the desolation they had made. It seemed to me that the pit had been enlarged, and ever and again puffs of vivid green vapor streamed up out of it towards the brightening dawn, streamed up, whirled, broke, and vanished. Beyond were the pillars of fire about Chobham. They became pillars of bloodshot smoke at the first touch of day. Again, hey, oh so very ordinary, how are you? Again, the way that Wells is prescient is astonishing often, especially in his early work. This really is they didn't have long-range missiles or targeting systems for explosives in 1898 when this was written. They barely had artillery shells, cannonballs. This idea of raining hellfire down upon an urban landscape. I mean, It sounds like a description of what's left behind by carpet bombing or a nuclear detonation. It really does. It's really harrowing. Chapter the 12th. What I Saw of the Destruction of Weybridge and Shepperton. How am I? How are the kiddies? Zoe keeps agitating. She's finally settled down. She was causing me trouble. They're doing well. Let me pull my nose again. I really need to get Kleenex just so I can be less uncouth than to blow my nose on a dirty t-shirt on stream. Like literally, I've been so broke. You guys have bought all my groceries, so started at the new job today, but I don't have folding money yet, so no Kleenex. It's a dirty t-shirt. It's gross. I know. Don't look at me like that. Don't judge me. Chapter the 12th. What I Saw of the Destruction of Weybridge and Shepperton. Congratulations. Thank you, Oh So Very Ordinary. As the dawn grew brighter, we withdrew from the window from which we had watched the Martians and went very quietly downstairs. The artilleryman agreed with me that the house was no place to stay in. He proposed, he said, to make his way Londonward and thence rejoin his battery, number 12 of the Horse Artillery. My plan was to return at once to Leatherhead, and so greatly had the strength of the Martians impressed me that I had determined to take my wife to New Haven and go with her out of the country forthwith, for I already perceived clearly that the country about London must inevitably be the scene of a disastrous struggle before such creatures as these could be destroyed. Between us and Leatherhead, however, lay the third cylinder, with its guarding giants. Had I been alone, I think I should have taken my chance and struck across country, but the artilleryman dissuaded me. It's no kindness to the right sort of wife, he said, to make her a widow, and in the end I agreed to go with him under cover of the woods northward as far as Street Cobham before I parted with him. Thence I would make a big detour by Epsom to reach Leatherhead. I should have started at once, but my companion had been in active service, and he knew better than that. He made me ransack the house for a flask, which he filled with whiskey, and we lined every available pocket with packets of biscuits and slices of meat. Then we crept out of the house and ran as quickly as we could down the ill-made road by which I had come overnight. The houses seemed deserted. In the road lay a group of 3 charred bodies close together, struck dead by the heat ray, and here and there were things that people had dropped: a clock, a slipper, a silver spoon, and the like poor valuables. At the corner turning up towards the post office, a little cart filled with boxes and furniture, and horseless, heeled over on a broken wheel. A cash box had been hastily smashed open and thrown under the debris. Except the lodge at the orphanage, which was still on fire, none of the houses had suffered very greatly here. The heat ray had shaved the chimney tops and passed. Yet, save ourselves, there did not seem to be a living soul on Maybury Hill. The majority of the inhabitants had escaped, I suppose, by way of the old Woking road, the road I had taken when I drove to Leatherhead, or they had hidden. We went down the lane by the body of the man in black, sodden now from the overnight hail, and broke into the woods at the foot of the hill. We pushed through these towards the railway without meeting a soul. The woods across the line were but the scarred and blackened ruins of woods. For the most part the trees had fallen, but a certain proportion still stood, dismal grey stems with dark brown foliage instead of green. On our side the fire had done no more than scorch the nearer trees. It had failed to secure its footing. In one place the woodmen had been at work on Saturday. Trees, felled and freshly trimmed, lay in a clearing with heaps of sawdust by the sawing machine and its engine. Hard by was a temporary hut, deserted. There was not a breath of wind this morning, and everything was strangely still. Even the birds were hushed, and as we hurried along, I and the artilleryman talked in whispers and looked now and again over our shoulders. Once or twice we stopped to listen. After a time we drew near the road, and as we did so we heard the clatter of hoofs and saw through the tree stems 3 cavalry soldiers riding slowly towards Woking. We hailed them, and they halted while we hurried towards them. It was a lieutenant and a couple of privates of the 8th Hussars, with a stand like a theodolite, with a stand like a theodolite, which the artilleryman told me was a heliograph. "You are the first men I've seen coming this way this morning," said the lieutenant. "What's brewing?" His voice and face were eager. The men behind him stared curiously. The artilleryman jumped down the bank into the road and saluted. "Gun destroyed last night, sir. Have been hiding. Trying to rejoin battery, sir. You'll come in sight of the Martians, I expect, about half a mile along this road." "What the dickens are they like?" asked the lieutenant. "Giants in armor, sir. 100 feet high. 3 legs and a body like aluminum with a mighty great head and a hood, sir." "Get out," said the lieutenant. "What confounded nonsense!" "You'll see, sir. They carry a kind of box, sir, that shoots fire and strikes you dead." "What do you mean, a gun?" "No, sir," and the artilleryman began a vivid account of the heat ray. Halfway through, the lieutenant interrupted him and looked up at me. I was still standing on the bank by the side of the road. "It's perfectly true," I said. "Well," said the lieutenant, "I suppose it's my business to see it too. Look here," to the artilleryman. "We're detailed here clearing people out of their houses. You'd better go along and report yourself to Brigadier General Marvin and tell him all you know. He's at Weybridge. Know the way?" "I do," I said, and he turned his horse southward again. "Half a mile, you say?" said he. "At most," I answered, and pointed over the treetops southward. He thanked me and rode on, and we saw them no more. Oh my God. My nose is never going to stop itching. I'm a little breathless. This is too exciting, actually. I'm a really excited reader. I'm a little amped. I'll be all right. Just Farther along, we came upon a group of 3 women and 2 children in the road, busy clearing out a laborer's cottage. They had got hold of a little hand truck and were piling it up with unclean-looking bundles and shabby furniture. They were all too assiduously engaged to talk to us as we passed. By Byfleet Station, we emerged from the pine trees and found the country calm and peaceful under the morning sunlight. We were far beyond the range of the heat ray there, and had it not been for the silent desertion of some of the houses, the stirring movement of packing in others, and the knot of soldiers standing on the bridge over the railway and staring down the line towards Woking, the day would have seemed very like any other Sunday. Several farm wagons and carts were moving creakily along the road to Addlestone, and suddenly through the gate of a field we saw, across a stretch of flat meadow, 12-pounders standing neatly at equal distances pointing towards Woking. The gunners stood by the guns waiting, and the ammunition wagons were at a business-like distance. The men stood almost as if under inspection. "That's good," said I. "They will get one fair shot at any rate." The artilleryman hesitated at the gate. "I shall go on," he said. Farther on towards Weybridge, just over the bridge, there were a number of men in white fatigue jackets throwing up a long rampart and more guns behind. "It's bows and arrows against the lightning, anyhow," said the artilleryman. "They haven't seen that fire beam yet." The officers who were not actively engaged stood and stared over the treetops southwestward, and the men digging would stop every now and again to stare in the same direction. Byfleet was in a tumult, people packing, and a score of hussars, some of them dismounted, some on horseback, were hunting them about. 3 or 4 black government wagons with crosses and white circles and an old omnibus, among other vehicles, were being loaded in the village street. There were scores of people, most of them sufficiently sabbatical to have assumed their best clothes. The soldiers were having the greatest difficulty in making them realize the gravity of their position. We saw one shriveled old fellow with a huge box and a score or more of flower pots containing orchids, angrily expostulating with the corporal who would leave them behind. I stopped and gripped his arm. "Do you know what's over there?" I said, pointing at the pine tops that hid the Martians. "Eh?" said he, turning. "Explaining these is valuable." "Death!" I shouted. "Death is coming! Death!" and leaving him to digest that if he could, I hurried on after the artilleryman. At the corner I looked back. The soldier had left him, and he was still standing by his box, with the pots of orchids on the lid of it, and staring vaguely over the trees. No one in Weybridge could tell us where the headquarters were established. The whole place was in such confusion as I had never seen in any town before. Carts, carriages everywhere, the most astonishing miscellany of conveyances and horseflesh. The respectable inhabitants of the place, men in golf and boating costumes, wives prettily dressed, were packing, riverside loafers energetically helping, children excited and, for the most part, highly delighted at this astonishing variation of their Sunday experiences. In the midst of it all, the worthy vicar was very pluckily holding an early celebration, and his bell was jangling out above the excitement. I and the artilleryman, seated on the step of the drinking fountain, made a very passable meal upon what we had brought with us. Patrols of soldiers, here no longer hussars but grenadiers in white, were warning people to move now or to take refuge in their cellars as soon as the firing began. We saw as we crossed the railway bridge that a growing crowd of people had assembled in and about the railway station, and the swarming platform was piled with boxes and packages. The ordinary traffic had been stopped, I believe, in order to allow of the passage of troops and guns to Chertsey, and I have heard since that a savage struggle occurred for places in the special trains that were put on at a later hour. We remained at Weybridge until midday, and at that hour we found ourselves at the place near Shepperton Lock, where the Wey and Thames join. I'm going to point out again, the reason he keeps being very specific about these place names is it takes place all near London. So in the pre-internet era, 1898, if you were anywhere that had any maps at all, you could unfold a map and look at it and see exactly where this story is taking place. It's like the way that Lord of the Rings has the map of Middle-earth in the front of the book, and then it's sort of closer in the sequels where the war action is. You can do that yourself with the map, with the key that is all the place names being mentioned within the text. I'm not doing it, but we could. You could do it right now. Part of the time we spent helping two old women to pack a little cart. The Wey has a treble mouth, and at this point boats are to be hired, and there was a ferry across the river. On the Shepperton side was an inn with a lawn, and beyond that the tower of Shepperton Church. It has been replaced by a spire, rose above the trees. Here we found an excited and noisy crowd of fugitives. As yet the flight had not grown to a panic, but there were already far more people than all the boats going to and fro could enable to cross. People came panting along under heavy burdens. One husband and wife were even carrying a small outhouse door between them, with some of their household goods piled thereon. One man told us he meant to try to get away from Shepperton Station. There was a lot of shouting, and one man was even jesting. The idea people seemed to have here was that the Martians were simply formidable human beings who might attack and sack the town, to be certainly destroyed in the end. Every now and then people would glance nervously along the way at the meadows towards Chertsey, but everything over there was still. Across the Thames, except just where the boats landed, everything was quiet, in vivid contrast with the Surrey side. The people who landed there from the boats went tramping off down the lane. The big ferry boat had just made a journey. 3 or 4 soldiers stood on the lawn of the inn, staring and jesting at the fugitives without offering to help. The inn was closed, as it was now within prohibited hours. "What's that?" cried a boatman, and "Shut up, you fool," said a man near me to a yelping dog. Then the sound came again, this time from the direction of Chertsey, a muffled thud, the sound of a gun. The fighting was beginning. Almost immediately, unseen batteries across the river to our right, unseen because of the trees, took up the chorus, firing heavily one after the other. A woman screamed. Everyone stood arrested by the sudden stir of battle near us and yet invisible to us. Nothing was to be seen save flat meadows, cows feeding unconcernedly for the most part, and silvery pollard willows motionless in the warm sunlight. "The soldiers will stop 'em," said a woman beside me doubtfully. A haziness rose over the treetops. Then suddenly we saw a rush of smoke far away up the river, a puff of smoke that jerked up into the air and hung, and forthwith the ground heaved underfoot and a heavy explosion shook the air, smashing 2 or 3 windows in the houses near and leaving us astonished. "Here they are," shouted a man in a blue jersey. "Yonder. Do you see them? Yonder." Quickly, one after the other, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the armored Martians appeared, far away over the little trees, across the flat meadows that stretched towards Chertsey, and striding hurriedly towards the river. Little cowled figures they seemed at first, going with a rolling motion and as fast as flying birds. Then, advancing obliquely towards us, came a fifth. Their armored bodies glittered in the sun as they swept swiftly forward upon the guns, growing rapidly larger as they drew nearer. One on the extreme left, the remotest that is, flourished a huge case high in the air, and the ghostly, terrible heat ray I had already seen on Friday night smote toward Chertsey and struck the town. At sight of these strange, swift, and terrible creatures, the crowd near the water's edge seemed to me to be for a moment horror-struck. There was no screaming or shouting, but a silence. Then a hoarse murmur and a movement of feet, a splashing from the water. A man, too frightened to drop the portmanteau he carried on his shoulder, swung round and sent me staggering with a blow from the corner of his burden. A woman thrust at me with her hand and rushed past me. I turned with the rush of the people, but I was not too terrified for thought. The terrible heat ray was in my mind. To get under water, that was it. Get under water, I shouted, unheeded. I faced about again and rushed towards the approaching Martian, rushed right down the gravelly beach and headlong into the water. Others did the same. A boatload of people putting back came leaping out as I rushed past. The stones under my feet were muddy and slippery, and the river was so low that I ran perhaps 20 feet, scarcely waist deep. Then, as the Martians towered overhead scarcely a couple of 100 yards away, I flung myself forward under the surface. The splashes of the people in the boats leaping into the river sounded like thunderclaps in my ears. People were landing hastily on both sides of the river. But the Martian machine took no more notice for the moment of the people running this way and that than a man would of the confusion of ants in a nest against which his foot has kicked. When, half suffocated, I raised my head above water, the Martian's hood pointed at the batteries that were still firing across the river, and as it advanced it swung loose what must have been the generator of the heat ray. In another moment it was on the bank and in a stride, wading halfway across. The knees of its foremost legs bent at the farther bank, and in another moment it had raised itself to its full height again, close to the village of Shepperton. Forthwith the 6 guns, which, unknown to anyone on the right bank, had been hidden behind the outskirts of that village, fired simultaneously. The sudden near concussion, the last close upon the first, made my heart jump. The monster was already raising the case generating the heat ray as the first shell burst 6 yards above the hood. I gave a cry of astonishment. I saw and thought nothing of the other 4 Martian monsters. My attention was riveted upon the nearer incident. Simultaneously, 2 other shells burst in the air near the body as the hood twisted round in time to receive, but not in time to dodge, the 4th shell. The shell burst clean in the face of the thing. The hood bulged, flashed, was whirled off in a dozen tattered fragments of red flesh and glittering metal. "Hit!" shouted I, with something between a scream and a cheer. I heard answering shouts from the people in the water about me. I could have leaped out of the water with that momentary exultation. The decapitated colossus reeled like a drunken giant, but it did not fall over. It recovered its balance by a miracle and, no longer heeding its steps and with the camera that fired the heat ray now rigidly upheld, it reeled swiftly upon Shepperton. The living intelligence, the Martian within the hood, was slain and splashed to the 4 winds of heaven, and the thing was now but a mere intricate device of metal whirling to destruction. It drove along in a straight line, incapable of guidance. It struck the tower of Shepperton Church, smashing it down as the impact of a battering ram might have done, swerved aside, blundered on, and collapsed with tremendous force into the river out of my sight. A sudden explosion shook the air, and a spout of water, steam, mud, and shattered metal shot far up into the sky. As the camera of the heat ray hit the water, the latter had immediately flashed into steam. In another moment, a huge wave, like a muddy tidal bore, but almost scaldingly hot, came sweeping round the bend upstream. I saw people struggling shorewards, and heard their screaming and shouting faintly above the seething and roar of the Martian's collapse. This is another place where, again, it's like he could see the future. This was written in 1898. He's just described for the first time the idea of a runaway vehicle. I mean, I guess horses can pull a runaway vehicle, Like you could lose the driver on a horse cart or a carriage, and it runs amok. But it's not the same thing. Maybe even better than Orson Welles. Oh man, Winter Hayden. Oh, what a compliment. He's kind of my hero. For a moment I heeded nothing of the heat, forgot the patent need of self-preservation. I splashed through the tumultuous water, pushing aside a man in black to do so, until I could see round the bend. Half a dozen deserted boats pitched aimlessly upon the confusion of the waves. The fallen Martian came into sight downstream, lying across the river, and for the most part submerged. Thick clouds of steam were pouring off the wreckage, and through the tumultuously whirling wisps I could see intermittently and vaguely the gigantic limbs churning the water and flinging a splash and spray of mud and froth into the air. The tentacles swayed and struck like living arms, and, save for the helpless purposelessness of these movements, it was as if some wounded thing were struggling for its life amid the waves. Enormous quantities of a ruddy brown fluid were spurting up in noisy jets out of the machine. I mean, it's motor oil. Like, I don't know how Wells would have known. I mean, he must have known a little bit about the state of the art of engines in 1898. More than me, obviously. My attention was diverted from this death flurry by a furious yelling, like that of the thing called a siren in our manufacturing towns. A man, knee-deep near the towing path, shouted inaudibly to me and pointed. Looking back, I saw the other Martians advancing with gigantic strides down the riverbank from the direction of Chertsey. The Shepperton guns spoke this time unavailingly. At that I ducked at once underwater and, holding my breath until movement was an agony, blundered painfully ahead under the surface as long as I could. The water was in a tumult about me and rapidly growing hotter. When for a moment I raised my head to take breath and throw the hair and water from my eyes, the steam was rising in a whirling white fog that at first hid the Martians altogether. The noise was deafening. Then I saw them dimly, colossal figures of gray, magnified by the mist. They had passed by me, and two were stooping over the frothing, tumultuous ruins of their comrade. The third and fourth stood beside him in the water, one perhaps 200 yards from me, the other towards Laleham. The generators of the heat rays waved high, and the hissing beams smote down this way and that. The air was full of sound, a deafening and confusing conflict of noises, the clangorous din of the Martians, the crash of falling houses, the thud of trees, fences, sheds flashing into flame, and the crackling and roaring of fire. Dense black smoke was leaping up to mingle with the steam from the river, and as the heat ray went to and fro over Weybridge, its impact was marked by flashes of incandescent white that gave place at once to a smoky dance of lurid flames. The nearer houses still stood intact, awaiting their fate, shadowy, faint, and pallid in the steam, and pallid in the steam with the fire behind them going to and fro. For a moment, perhaps I stood there, breast high in the almost boiling water, dumbfounded at my position, hopeless of escape. Through the reek, I could see the people who had been with me in the river scrambling out of the water through the reeds, like little frogs hurrying through grass from the advance of a man, or running to and fro in utter dismay on the towing path. Then suddenly the white flashes of the heat ray came leaping towards me. The houses caved in as they dissolved at its touch and darted out flames. The trees changed to fire with a roar. It's like he has seen a napalm strike. It really is. There just wasn't anything like that in 1898. There really was not. Then suddenly the white flashes of the heat ray came leaping towards me. The houses caved in as they dissolved at its touch and darted out flames. The trees changed to fire with a roar. The ray flickered up and down the towing path, licking off the people who ran this way and that, and came down to the water's edge not 50 yards from where I stood. It swept across the river to Shepperton, and the water in its track rose in a boiling wheel crusted with steam. I turned shoreward. In another moment, the huge wave, well nigh at the boiling point, had rushed upon me. I screamed aloud, and scalded, half-blinded, agonized, I staggered through the leaping, hissing water towards the shore. Had my foot stumbled, it would have been the end. I fell helplessly, in full sight of the Martians, upon the broad, bare, gravelly spit that runs down to mark the angle of the Wey and Thames. I expected nothing but death. I have a dim memory of the foot of a Martian coming down within a score of yards of my head, driving straight into the loose gravel, whirling it this way and that, and lifting again, of a long suspense, and then of the four carrying the debris of their comrade between them, now clear and then perfect, and then presently faint through a veil of smoke, receding interminably, as it seemed to me, across a vast space of river and meadow. And then, very slowly, I realized that by a miracle I had escaped. Hey, Gandalf, how are ya? This is intense, man. This is intense. I've read this before, and when you read it silently, you do burn quickly through this novel. Like it's like a trashy bestseller. Like it's like reading an action movie, but still reading it out loud is the rhythm of Wells's prose is just so intense. He is such a good writer. And so ahead of his time, it's not often remarked how much he is one of the primary architects of how this kind of punchy, hyper intense, sort of forward velocity impulsed prose is. Yeah, Gandalf, I hadn't read it for, it's not one of my favorite H.G. Wells novels. It's not one of the ones I read over and over. Like, I've read The Time Machine more, and Moreau is the only one I really read over and over. And I like The Food of the Gods a lot also. But there's so much H.G. Wells that once I got old enough that I was into the Wells that isn't the fun science fiction novels, like, Mr. Polly and some of the later stuff that just wanders off into, he gets really didactic about socialist ideas. I mean, he thought he was being that way in most of the early stuff too. I did remember that this novel is kind of harrowing. I don't think I knew. I mean, the last time I read it was before 9/11, was before the war in Iraq, was before the current conflict in Palestine and Gaza, and before I knew so many vets. I don't know whether Wells was a vet. I don't think he was. His understanding of tactical movements and actions and the leverage that things like artillery, the terrain, his understanding of how much topographical terrain elements affect a battle and a battleground. And these descriptions of the heat ray destroying neighborhoods really is like, it is like the descriptions of the destruction at Dresden or Hiroshima. It's like, I don't, and in the passage I just read, there's 3 or 4 places where his understanding of how vehicles work, it is like, I don't know how he understood so well so many things he could not have ever seen with his own eyes. Yeah, I'm going to read a couple more chapters. That actually was where I was planning to stop, but I read some of that in such a rush that I'm like 20 minutes ahead of where I expected to be based on page count. Yeah, I'm reading this because Dave and I went to a thrift store the other day. He likes to comb thrift stores for movies to watch and books to read. And so I picked up this battered, heavily lined Dover copy. It's like a 50 cent. It was a 50-cent books, public domain book. And Svengoolie is showing the George Powell movie this Saturday. And so I was already trying to talk Dave into, like, if I'm gonna mess up my stream with the bots, let's hang out and watch Svengoolie live. Like, if we're gonna get drunk on stream, let's watch Svengoolie instead of listening to music. I can't believe in the time of radio plays being the main entertainment, anyone would believe it was a real news report. Wells almost got in real trouble over that. He had to change the name of his show too, Gandalf. The reason that the Mercury Theater, like, there's only like 20 episodes of it, I think they called it Campbell Playhouse after that. But it ran for another year as Campbell Playhouse because it was such a problem. Like, they really oh, so very ordinary. So Svengoolie's Saturday night show, it did broadcast TV. Svengoolie is on here. I don't know what time it's on, but I guess they don't advertise what movie Svengoolie is going to show, except like, you have to be watching the live ads. So Svengoolie is showing the George Powell, the early 50s movie of War of the Worlds this Saturday night. And it's a really good movie. And I haven't seen that for 20 or 30 years either. And so I was kind of psyched to see that. And then, like, I ran across this copy of this and I was like, you know what? I'll interrupt my Lovecraft readings to read War of the Worlds because it's been so long since I read it. And I guess it was a good idea because my numbers are really good on this. Like, yesterday, there were like 70 views, which is like the internet equivalent of 0, but normally my readings don't have many views. If I would just stick to this for a while. Thanks for being here, guys, by the way. You're welcome to send me money. PayPal.me/Roganautica if you want to help buy our groceries. I did start work at the new job today, but I'm probably still short a few bucks for what I need to get through. And I'm trying to raise rent, but I don't know for where yet. So it's sort of an amorphous, like, you will just have to trust me not to spend the extra money on cocaine or steaks. It's going to be tempting with the steaks. Cocaine, I'd have to go out of my way to find and work up an appetite for. I already want a steak or pizza. This Svengoolie show used to be available in DC, but now I can't get it. I've never watched him much before. Like, the broadcast channel here, their Saturday night is Svengoolie and then Star Wars and then Batman, or maybe the other way around. But it's like, that's cool. Except I'm like, I'm on old man schedule. I tend to be asleep. Like, if you guys see me up after 1 a.m, like, if I'm on, something's wrong. I have done it a couple of times recently, but usually I'm asleep. Tomorrow I got to go to the hospital with Dave in the morning. Yeah, Coke is a dragon, and you know what Bilbo says about dragons? No, I don't. Fuck them if they can't take a joke. Oh, that's Gollum. Fuck, I'm not supposed to swear in the reading streams. I apologize. God damn it. I'm sorry, Harry. I'm sorry. I really never laugh at a live dragon. Yeah, Lord of the Rings I have sitting here too, and I kind of I've been threatening to read that, but maybe I will. I kind of thought reading something super famous wouldn't, like, I just wanted to read more obscure stuff because I've read, like, a lot of books. So, like, I have some fun ideas, but I didn't think so many people would come in for War of the Worlds. It didn't occur to me, actually, that this is super exciting in the moment from page to page. Like, it's pretty breathless. It does not let up. Like, if you were just flipping through lives and seeing what was going on and you were at all baited in by the title saying, I'm reading War of the Worlds, like, you're going to be into whatever's going on. It's pretty cool. And it's a straight line, too, which is also, like Lord of the Rings, I thought would be good to read because everyone kind of knows it, and you just, wherever you drop down into, wherever I happen to be reading, you could just dial right in. Like, it's not, even if you've only seen the movies, and even if you haven't read the books or seen the movies, it's a straight line narrative. But this has that quality too. Like, you can just turn it on anywhere, and it's a straight line narrative. Like, you're dropped right into the action. 124. Maybe I should go ahead and call it. This is a good place to stop, because the next part is the part where he meets the crazy guy in the basement, right? Yeah. I think. No, it's not. Well, with the alien stuff and the new space stuff is popular. Yeah. Spielberg also has a new movie coming out. What is it called? Disclosure Day. Same screenwriter who wrote Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise. Day of the Triffids is a good idea to read. Oh, So Very Ordinary. I don't have a way to order books